This next video here, I'm gonna look a little bit more into the creating of objects. We see I've got a polygon sphere. I'm gonna go create NURBS circle. Think of this as your splines. The one drawback to these NURBS circles is that we don't have an option to make it a renderable spline to actually give it some depth. If we wanted something like that, we'd actually have to apply a loft to this. So for example, if I want to copy this, notice holding shift and moving does nothing. We just hit Control D to copy, and I can now, I'm going to just, and notice that the copy, notice I have the ability to affect the radius, but the copy doesn't have that option. That's because the history for this particular object has been removed. So make this guy bigger again. And history is something that's unique to Maya. Max's history is kind of wrapped up inside the modifiers and your undos. So for example, let me see which one it was. Here it is. So if I turn off my construction history, and let's create a cylinder. Okay. So you notice that I can create it, I can move it, I can scale it, I can do all these things here. But notice how we don't have the polygon inputs to actually affect the cylinder object itself. This guy don't have that option. And if we were to actually get into doing a lot of extrusions and adjustments and stuff like that onto the surface, it will just keep adding up inside of this inputs rollout. It'll just keep adding everything that we do to it. That's the history of the object. When an object doesn't have history, obviously it's less memory intensive. You have less control, but the point being that it frees up the memory and it's less resource intensive. And the process of what you do in Maya is once you model objects and you're happy with it, you delete the history, which will free up the resources. But you'll notice that, like I said, when we copy, we just did a straight duplicate, we lose the inputs of the NURBS circle. So let's go to Edit, and we see Duplicate, Control D, and I don't have an option box. If we go Duplicate Special, this one does have an option box. And here I can say, let's say we want to make a new one. This duplicate input graph, if I turn that off, notice we can go instance, which we're familiar with Max, copy, parent, world, new group. But if we tell it to duplicate the input graph, the only thing we can do is group it under the world, which is make another one. So if I hit duplicate special, move this over, notice this guy actually has the ability to affect the history, so to speak. So I'm just going to bring this guy down really small, let's say 0.05, and I'm going to select on this one here, and I'm going to go to the surfaces module, and we see we have some of our options that we're kind of used to in the modify tab. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select on this guy, hold shift, select on the small one, and let's try a extrude. So we see there we have created a torus from the actual from those two shapes. I'm going to undo and go into the option box here. So we can see we have a lot of options of how we can create this thing. going to create it at the path, component, profile, so we just say extrude, and we see kind of what happened there. So I'm going to undo. And I think I'm going to try to go reverse order, because order means a lot. So let's do the extrude again. So we see that time we went from the shape to the path first. So we selected here, here, and then with the settings, the result at the path, pivot point on the component mode, and everything, so on and so forth. We see that it has turned our spline into something with some shape. The issue is now it's renderable, and if we wanted to tell it to not render, we'd actually have to delete it altogether. So the point being is that even though this does resemble the splines and everything that we have in Max, we really don't have the option of going renderable, non-renderable like you do in Max. Therefore, these splines, these NURBS shapes are really kind of meant more for when, you know, for like rigging tools, things that just will never render. We see just never going to show up. We can also loft between two of them. So let's say, for example, I rotate this guy, and I'll Control D. Okay, so see, I just did a basic control, so I didn't duplicate the input graph. And if I just select both of these guys and I go loft, I'll just go to the settings here. We'll do uniform. Everything looks good. I'll just go ahead and say loft. Alright, so now we have a cylinder, and if I click here, you see that I can actually select on the NURBS. And if I go to my scale tool, notice that it didn't do anything. Right? The reason being is my construction history is still turned off. So what I'm going to do is do this again. I'm going to turn our construction history on, and we'll go ahead and duplicate this guy, and we'll loft again. And you'll see now that when I scale it, because the construction history is turned on, it remembers that the loft itself, and we see we select on the actual surface, we can get into the parameters. Let me see, we can add sections and everything. Now what I want to do is actually kind of talk to you a little bit about the component mode. I'm going to delete this guy here. So you see I can manipulate the object itself, and it's going to update. But what if I wanted to change the sphere itself on like a vertex level? If we go to our F9 button on our keyboard, we see that this is our control vertices. So you see we can move these around, and it's going to affect our shape. F10 we see is the CVs. And if I right click and hold on the object, we see these are all the different like sub-object modes. That's what you can think of these as. So object mode gets back out to the total shape, which is the same as F8. So we see control vertex. Okay, it selects on the whole thing, right? So if I was selected just on the NURB circle and went to control vertex, right? So there's all of our controls on this NURBS loft that we've created from just the two circles. These are all the controls, and because we've added in those those two extra isoparms, I can go like scale and scale these guys in. So we see how we can adjust. We can adjust the shape here from this NURBS loft. Maybe I will take this guy. I'll go to Q so I can just do select. And just holding shift to add. So now when I go scale, I can scale these guys straight down like so. So those are just some of the basics that we have. Curve points, so we see that I was actually, notice I was not doing anything to the actual circle there. I was actually adjusting the loft itself. So I'm going to hit F9 again to go into just a shortcut for this guy. So we see we can adjust not just the circle itself, but the loft object, and vice versa. So we can get some interesting control that way. So I'm going to go ahead and delete. Let's just delete everything. We get F8 to get back into object mode, and we see we can now select everything. It's like getting out of sub-object mode. And I'm going to go create NURB sphere. Actually, I don't want that one. I want to go Polygon Cube. Okay. So we see if I go F9, there's our vertices. F10 is our edges, and F11 is our faces. Okay, so we have those are our components, and again F8 will get out of it altogether. You'll notice up here, say when I go to F10, where I'm now in edge mode, we see that this is telling me I'm in component mode. So you see I'm down at the sub-object level for what we're used to in Max of this particular object. And if I click back to back here, that's the same thing as F8 and getting out of it. So the same thing's bouncing back and forth. But those are just a lot of the basics when it comes to creating and manipulating our shapes. It kind of just gets us right back into the idea of, you know, how we can go about making and creating and modeling and stuff like that. The last thing I want to talk about, as we see here, the pivot point of this object has been adjusted, or it's actually maladjusted. It's not where it would be. If we go modify center pivot, you see I've mapped it to C. That is the quick way of adjusting the pivot point. Centers it right to the object. And if I hit insert, this is now the affect pivot only mode, and you see I can move this guy around wherever I want and actually get this guy positioned up. And then insert again, and now the pivot point has been adjusted. So again, just see that I've already adjusted my keys, my my shortcut keys. So that's just some of the basics again of creating and kind of moving around and dealing with moving. Some of them, again, more of the basic things that we're very familiar with when it comes to Max. So I'll see you in the next one, and we will keep rolling trucking.